the earth as leaven in the dough. We Christians must rise up to the fore. God's love we will show, the light in us shall glow. In IQ together we soar. Clergy and laity, women and men, in Christ divisions all shall merge. Bonded and free, you and me, all voices must be heard. As salt of the earth, as leaven in the dough, we Christians must rise up to the fore. God's love we will show, the light in us shall glow. In IQ together we soar. Sister and brother, father and mother, in Christ we all of us are one. Older or younger, richer or poorer, our church needs everyone. As salt of the earth, as leaven in the dough, we Christians must rise up to the fore. God's love we will show, the light in us shall glow. In IQ together we soar. When times are tough, when things get rough, with Christ united we will stand. For the need of the hour is a sharing of power, when we walk hand in hand. As salt of the earth, as leaven in the dough, we Christians must rise up to the fore. God's love we will show, the light in us shall glow. In IQ together we soar. In IQ together we soar. In IQ together we soar.
Your Grace, Thomas de Souza, Archbishop of Kolkata and Chairman of Education Commission, CBCI, for the Frazer Mascarenhas, ex-principal of St. Xavier College, Mumbai, Sri Kapil, Patil, MLC, Maharashtra, representing the Teachers Constituency and a veteran journalist, for the Francis Swamy, Joint Secretary of Archdiocesan Board of Education and convener for the Jesuits Board of Education, Dr. John Dayal, spokesperson and former president of AICU, active journalist, today's moderator, Dolphy Souza, the president of BCS, Advocate Rafael de Souza, the principal office bearers of All India Catholic Union, members of All India Catholic Union and all affiliated diocesan units, and my dear participants from all parts of India. Greetings from All India Catholic Union, which celebrated its centenary in 2019, but for COVID had grand plans to this year for the outreach, training and empowerment of India's growing laity. But webinars have come to our assistance, cutting down the distance and overcoming the impedance. AICU has had a series of webinars policy is the latest. When the draft of National Education Policy was uploaded on the website of the Ministry of Human Resource Development, as it was then known, the AICU joined other Christian groups to organize the national consultation in New Delhi. It was a huge success. We were part of the delegation which called on HRD Minister and submitted a memorandum expressing the concern of the religious minorities and other groups. The final NEP was not addressed those concerns. In fact, it has aggravated the situation. The new education policy not only has nothing for the religious and other minorities, including Dalits, it may put at risk the very future of the minority educations as in the Constitution, impacting our Constitution and the mission of the faith. The Catholic hierarchy and the religious congregations, which run anyway up to 40,000 educational institutions, big and small, are directly alarmed. The government seems to have an eye on their resources without offering anything to their development. This also erodes the guarantee under the Article 30 of the Constitution. As laity, your concern is manifold, far greater than that of any owner of the institutions can be. The laity is paid and they are other workers. Their number is run not in thousands but in crores. Not all Catholic children study in Catholic schools. Not all work in Catholic institutions. Our concern with the NEP are therefore holistic, covering every aspect very relationally. We may plan more webinars in coming months to focus on specific areas. This is the beginning of the learning of the process on looking for the microscope to the hidden agenda. Once again, without spending much time, I leave this virtual arena to speakers who will enlighten us in different directions. Welcome to you all. Have a great beginning to learn NEP on many aspects. Thank you.
Thank you, President Lancy, for your opening remarks. We now request Archbishop Thomas D'Souza, Archbishop of Kolkata, and also Chairperson of the Education Commission of the Catholic Bishops Conference of India, inaugurate and give his inaugural address. Archbishop Thomas D'Souza.
Dear Mr. Dolphy Souza, spokesperson, Bombay Catholic Sabha, and moderator of today's program. Mr. Lancy Dikuna, President, All India Catholic Union. Dr. John Dayal, spokesperson and ex-president of AICU. Advocate Rafael D'Souza, National Secretary, AICU, and President of the Bombay Catholic Sabha. Reverend Father Frazer Mascarenhas SJ, ex-principal of St. Xavier's, Mumbai. Reverend Dr. Francis Swamy SJ, Joint Secretary, Archdiocesan Board of Education, Mumbai, and convener of Jesuit Schools Board. Mr. Kapil Patil, MLC-Teachers Constituency, and all present here, dear friends, for participating in this program this evening. Good evening to all of you. My cordial greetings to each one of you on behalf of the CBCI Office for Education and Culture. I'm particularly grateful to Mr. Lancy Dikuna, the President of All India Catholic Union, for inviting me to inaugurate this important virtual gathering of eminent educationists whose service to our church, country, and society has been great. I'm aware that ever since the government of India started preparing the draft national education policy, the Catholic Church in India was very concerned about the outcome of this exercise. Nonetheless, time and again, many suggestions for improvement, our own concerns, and for balance were sent to the drafting committee of the government. Ever since the National Education Policy 2020 was accepted by the government for implementation, the Church's concerns have only increased. The NEP 2020 has been widely studied, discussed, debated, and analyzed by our eminent educationists as well as the teaching fraternity, and all are united in voicing their fears in many areas of this policy, from preparatory education to higher education, for its implications have far-reaching consequences for the Church as a minority community. The words minority and minority rights do not appear anywhere in this policy. SC, STs, minorities, girl children, and children with special needs. All these categories have been put under one broader section called socially and economically disadvantaged group. This is a major concern that we have. Where do the minorities stand? What are their rights? Rights guaranteed by the Constitution? Are they guaranteed at all in this national education policy? Secondly, as is known, originally education was a state subject. It was shifted to concurrent budget as it is now. NEP 2020 has demolished the federal character of India by promoting centralization, by controlling all decision making, centralizing everything from ECCE and primary education to higher education, including professional education. This is another major concern of ours. What is the role of states? How far do we have to abide by what the center gives the policy to the whole country? Thirdly, all infrastructure in schools run by the Catholic Church all over the country, like teaching staff, laboratories, playgrounds, libraries, classrooms, will have to be shared with students from other schools or other institutions as directed by the government. As directed by the government. This is another major concern. This way of setting up school complexes and clusters, as they are called in the NEP 2020, can become another form of government control. And therefore, how do we face this? What is the way forward? I'm not dwelling at length on all the aspects because there are eminent speakers who are here who will throw light on all these. The hurry with which the NEP 2020 has been published in this time of COVID-19 pandemic shows that the government is not ready to have a wider discussion about the practicality of the policy and its implementation. I'm glad that the All India Catholic Union as well as the Catholics of Mumbai have taken the initiative to discuss the National Education Policy 2020 and its implications. In fact, the CBCI Office for Education and Culture had organized a number of webinars in the months of August, September, and also the other educational, Catholic educational bodies, boards, etc. A lot of work has been done, a lot of discussion has gone on into this policy and its various aspects. And again, I'm very happy that the laity, as always, have been in the forefront to face this challenge, especially now given to us by this NEP 2020. The eminent speakers and educationists this evening will analyze the NEP 2020 for us. On behalf of the CBCI Office for Education and Culture, I thank them. I'm very happy that together the CBCI Commission, CBCI Office for Education and Culture, and all the other organizations, the CRI, as well as the laity organizations, we all work together, and this is must in this time of this challenge given to us by the government through this NEP 2020. Let us create among our people an awareness. I think this is very important. An awareness has to be created of these implications and suggest steps that would make quality education available to all, very especially the poor. So I wish all of you, as I greet you once again.
Our first speaker for the day is Frazer Mascarenhas, from the site of Jesus. He's got for over 12 years, and long 28 years of teaching at the college. He's also been in 2006 on the working group on undergraduate education of the Knowledge Commission. Then in 2011, State Planning Commission for Higher Technical Education. currently manager of Stanislaus High School and the International School. But what is very, very important for us, citizens in Mumbai, us, citizens, campus. Thank you, Father, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Archbishop Thomas, and my dear friends. If you don't mind, I will do away with the courtesies because we are running short of time. The new education policy is something that we are all, of course, concerned about and debating. It begins with the UN goal of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and that goal is to ensure inclusive and equitable quality education for all. And that's something that our country so badly needs. The NEP document uses very beautiful language to describe the principles, the processes, the goals of education. For example, with the quickly changing employment landscape and global ecosystem, it is becoming increasingly critical that children not only learn, but more importantly, learn how to learn. Education thus must move towards less content and more towards learning about how to think critically and to solve problems. So well put. So there are really very nice ways in which it has described what education should be in our country. But the document says right at the beginning, such a lofty goal will require the entire education system to be reconfigured to support and foster learning. The entire education system. This, I think, my friends, is a very hasty conclusion. It shows disrespect for history and for the educational process, which is cumulative and gradual. It therefore makes proposals, the document makes proposals, which will be devastating for education in the country, not just minority education, the whole of education. I feel the education system is going to get a real shock. And may I now try to justify such a very strong statement. I have 8 or 9 points and I'll quickly go through them. Some of these points already Archbishop Thomas has broached. So let me take it a little bit more slowly explaining some of these points. Take the change in the grouping of years from the 10 plus 2 plus 3 system. The UNESCO denotes children from 3 to 8 years as pre-primary or foundational. This is because in some countries, the pre-primary starts from the age of 3, while in others it begins only at the age of 7. There are some countries which begin this type of formal pre-primary at 7. And therefore, 3 to 8 is given as the pre-primary stage. Now, India has opted to begin from the maximum age 3, knowing that our infrastructure and our teaching capability is woefully missing. Many good schools have begun the lower and higher kindergarten, KG, but elsewhere, in most of the country, definitely in Maharashtra, Anganwadis have workers from the Children and Women Welfare Department dealing really with nutrition, not with education. Where is the infrastructure and where are the teachers to come from if all this is to be brought into education? Where even over a whole decade, this is going to be an impossible task given the present state of affairs. The NEP says it will solve that problem. It will give 6 months in-service online training on mobiles to the Anganwadi workers. And for infrastructure, various possibilities are mentioned, which mean that equity will be compromised. Everybody will not get the infrastructure required for this stage. So I don't see the point in having such a long pre-primary training, foundational stage, when we just don't have the infrastructure, we don't have the teaching abilities. Again, the middle school now has been incorporated, incorporated the 8th standard. Now, the organization I belong to has several middle schools in remote tribal and other areas. And from the 8th standard, that's up till 7th. From the 8th standard, children go to a central secondary school because in the younger years, they cannot travel. So, the central school, and there they continue the secondary education. Now, with this policy, the infrastructure for the 8th standard will have to be built in all our middle schools. You can imagine what a massive project that is. Colleges have been asked to have a 4-year degree program. Now, again, massive infrastructure and teachers training will have to be provided. The 4-year degree introduced in Delhi University some time ago resulted in a fiasco. It had to be withdrawn. The 4th year will be useful really only for the 1% of students that want to go abroad for higher studies, because they need 16 years and we are providing 15, 12 plus 3. However, our colleges have shown, especially under autonomy, and I was in a college that took up autonomy, and we really gave a great deal of emphasis to the content and to the teaching, learning process. Now, those 3 years we felt are quite sufficient to give the knowledge and the skills that our students need. Why force our students to invest in an extra year? It means an investment of finance and of a whole year of their lives for graduation. This does not make sense. In other words, there is very little justification for such structural changes which will cause massive disruption of the educational system. That's my first point. Let me go straight away, my friends, to funding, because all this requires money. Funding remains a major problem. The very government which reduced spending on education to 2.7% of the GDP. Who is saying so? The government itself said so in the NEP draft document, you will remember that. And earlier it was even a little above 4%. So spending has dropped. The government has also shown that it has no resources at the moment even to pay the state's share of the CGSE. Will they be able to fund even the minimum needed for the major changes to be effected? There is not the slightest chance of this happening. And the government itself realizes this. They are counting on PPP, Public Philanthropic Partnership. Now, this is, I think, a very unrealistic dream. Rather, this is a stimulus for the further privatization of education. Education has already moved towards privatization. The public system has been degraded. The state seems to be withdrawing. And now this is going to continue. So that's my second point. We really don't have funding for such large, major, drastic changes. Third point, not content with going so far in its radical change, the NEP has decided, as Archbishop Thomas said, to remove the present governing structure of all institutions by having no role for the present managing trustees. Institutions with their infrastructure and excellent work culture have been built up over years, over decades. But now a school complex management committee and a school management committee will take over and will make all the decisions from appointing the principal, coming up with its plan, etc. All that will be under the government now with its own committee. In higher education also, a board of governors will be established in universities, and the present governing bodies will not have any part to do with that. In fact, there shall be overarching legislation that will supersede any contravening provisions of earlier legislation. That's what the document is saying. In other words, untested governance structures consisting of several people, at least in the school, with no experience of managing education, will destroy the institutions that people have built up over the years. All institutions. The management has built these up. Now, if they're going to be taken over by some other government-appointed management, you can imagine what the plight of those institutions will turn to. Fourth, a sharing of resources has been mandated. Human and material, this is being envisaged. A school that is better equipped will have to share. Sharing is very nice, but what type of sharing, my friends? Pairing of schools or twinning, one private, one public, is mandated. And of course, the school complex will mean several schools in the area will be able to share a good school's resources. However, sharing teachers and infrastructure will cripple the good school, especially if the governing board is not controlled by the school's own management, present management. Isn't this a refusal to build the necessary infrastructure needed for all? And is a teacher like a robo, like a machine, going to be taken from one school and dumped into another school, and then now you teach there? Totally different infrastructure, work culture, a total different type of philosophy of the other school. Is this a possibility? In other words, what institutions have built up of that work culture and the whole philosophy, that's going to be destroyed. Fifth, the emphasis on digital learning, technological solutions, open schools, by the way, even for the primary, and vocational exits. This will leave the girl child, the socially and economically disadvantaged, the differently abled, and minority community students without opportunity for a quality education. Because a quality education means interacting with peers, not an open school, not online courses. Those are okay for certain technical skills that you might be able to learn. Complementary, fine. But what is education? It's interacting with peers in a stimulating, healthy environment of an educational campus. This is going to be now something that people will be pushed out of. People don't drop out of school, my friends. We know that. They are pushed out. They are not able to cope, and therefore they are pushed out. They are not given the capacity to cope. Even at the higher education level, having 3 types of universities, research, teaching, and degree awarding colleges will institutionalize poor quality, because today teaching and research have to go hand in hand. Science and knowledge is progressing at a very, very fast pace. And so, if you have these 3 categories, you're going to have the 2 lower categories giving very poor type of education. There will obviously be some better and some others in research, but to stratify them in this manner definitely goes against equity. I think we need to consider this. Sixth, the introduction of Samajik Chetna Kendras in the school campus. Wouldn't these be ideology-based, controlled by the government of the day? Remember, the management of the school is now under the government-appointed committee. Also, the school complex will be used for adult education courses, for other community engagement and enrichment activities. In other words, no control will remain over the school campus. What type of education will we be able to give then? Seventh, I think Archbishop Thomas has spoken very well on this. The centralization of creation of content right from the pre-primary bodes ill for quality and for addressing local needs and conditions. Section 4.31 says, the responsibility for ECC, early childhood care education, curriculum and pedagogy will lie with the MHRD. MHRD at the center. In other words, the NEP pushes for national textbooks with local content and flavor. A little bit you can tinkle with it, but it's all centralized. Centralization also of school assessment through the National Assembly Assessment Survey is on the cards. I quote, the National Testing Agency, NTA, will serve as a premier, expert, autonomous testing organizations to conduct entrance examination for undergraduate and graduate admissions. So all undergraduate and graduate admissions will have to go to a central testing agency. Even recruitment of students at the college level then will be centralized, as 4.42 says. In other words, my friends, such centralization goes against quality of education and against the rights of the states, precisely what Archbishop told us. 8, and this now is a point we are all aware of. There is no mention of minority education rights at all, a total eclipse. What about Article 30 of the Constitution? Have they forgotten that there is such an article which says minorities, both religious as well as linguistic, can start and run, administer their own, yes, thank you, administer their own institutions? This has been removed. Under constitutional values, there's no mention of secularism at all, one of the pillars of our constitution. This is obviously deliberate. The government has already been speaking of Hindutva. So is this the inauguration of Hindutva? Parallel to removing constitutional guarantees to minorities, the SCs and STs also do not find mention. And therefore, that too is a blow. And finally, this document contravenes the right to education provisions which have just been put into the Constitution. These provisions that NEP says are too restrictive, and therefore they have to be diluted. So you, my friends, we know that the Supreme Court has guaranteed that the basic character of the Constitution cannot be changed. Several times this has been reiterated. Now the NEP is clearly indicating an intention to change the Constitution in substantial ways. Otherwise, these provisions will be struck down by the court. So in other words, we can expect in the next Parliament session that major changes will be attempted in the Constitution, because otherwise the NEP does not stand. On many points it does not stand. So we have to be ready for that, my friends. Let me then end now with this point, that no Christian educator was involved in the whole exercise, in spite of Christian educational institutions being among the most sought after and highly rated. Highly rated by whom? By government and by the public, not by we ourselves. Now, how is that no democratic participation was invited from Christian educators? This seems to be happening also, not just at the state level when the NEP was being framed, but it is happening at the state level too. In Maharashtra, for example, there are 2 committees that have been formed for implementation of the NEP, the school and higher education. No Christian educator is part of those committees. My friends, therefore, what is the agenda of the NEP? It does not seem to be an educational agenda. Some other agenda is on the cards. And so I think we are still a democracy, and we still have the possibility of raising our voice, of asking for participation in decision making on something so important as education. The whole of our country's future is dependent on this. So I do think we have to connect with each other, with people across the country, and petition the government at both levels, the center and especially now at the states, because that is where policy is being framed. If we do that and we put enough of pressure on our governments, we have the opportunity of asking for changes to save education for our country. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Frazer, for this very insightful and a very powerful insight into this whole business of the NEP 2020. In fact, taking on from what you said, it's just not a fight of the Christian institutions. It is also a fight for education for all communities, all institutions. And that's the reason why our next speaker, who's a dear friend of mine, Mr. Kapil Patil, is a member of the Legislative Council of Maharashtra, having a hat trick, being elected by the Teachers' Constituency for 3 terms in a row. Kapil is also a veteran journalist, and one of the things that he was involved in and which is to be noted is when Father Francis de Bilto was in the movement against the underworld in Vasai under the campaign of Harit Vasai Saurakshan Samiti. Mr. Kapil Patil was in the vanguard as a journalist at very personal risk to life, covering those stories. And we know what really happened after that in terms of that campaign, which was very, very successful to contain the underworld. So may I request Mr. Kapil Patil to address us.
Thank you, Dolphy. Thank you, Archbishop. First of all, I would like to thank All India Catholic Union and Bombay Catholic Sabha and my friend Dolphy Souza for inviting me to this webinar. Greetings to all the respected speakers. I'm merely presenting 2-3 points for your consideration. I'm not criticizing the new education policy only because it has been prepared by the BJP government. But I'm criticizing this policy because it goes against India's composite culture and secular tradition. And everyone should be offended by NEP 2020 for the very same reason. This new policy seeks to promote Prachin and Sanatani principles. Prachin and Sanatani principles means a society and tradition that believes in Manuvadi Vyavastha system, caste system. This tradition is opposed by all eminent social reformers like Raja Ram Mohan Rai to Mahatma Phule, Dr. Basa Ambedkar, Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Nehru, and many others. NEP 2020 insists that the children should be educated loudly, but seeks to deprive poor children from English education. This policy accepts the 3-language policy, but at the same time insists on Sanskrit, a language that has lost its relevance today, and that is going to affect the education of mother tongue and English also. English education, higher education, and everything else will continue to be available to the wealthy and mighty, but the poor will be completely deprived. Minorities will be completely deprived. This policy will speed up privatization of education and thereby reduce the liability of the government. As already mentioned by Father Frazer, he mentioned PPP and cluster schools. These schemes are nothing but a ploy to close down the schools having lesser number of children, this clusters or school complex will close down at least 1 lakh schools. Privatization of higher education will close down about 35,000 colleges. NAP 2020 is this a roadmap to reverse the limited development achieved so far. A huge section of the population will be deprived by education and an opportunity to develop if this policy comes into force. RSS nationalism, Hindu Rashtravad agenda through this policy, through this education, which will destroy our secular fabric and composite culture of the country. RSS अभी हर स्कूल को अपनी शाखा बनाना चाहते हैं. Therefore, we all must resist this new education policy till our last breath. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dolphy.
Thank you, Kapil Bhau, for insights, and we will definitely need your support in terms of moving the legislators, at least in Maharashtra, to campaign against this policy and with the Chief Minister, so that they can take a stand, although education is in the state subject, in the concurrent subject. So thank you so much, and we will. Thank you so much for your insights. Our next speaker is none other than Reverend Father Francis Swamy, who is the Joint Secretary of the Archdiocesan Board of Education, Mumbai. He is the principal of St. Mary's High School, coordinator for the Jesuits Education Board. He's been a winner of several awards. One of them has been the Best Teacher Award in the principal category by the state. May we request Father Francis to speak to us?
Your Eminence, Archbishop Thomas, all the office bearers of the All India Catholic Union and Bombay Catholic Sabha, and my dear friends, let me share some of my reflection with you. The first education policy was introduced in 1968. It was replaced in 1986 and was modified in 1992. The present national education policy was approved by the Union Cabinet on 29 July 2020. The education policy seeks to introduce and implement a sea of changes across all levels of education in India, including the essential understanding of education in the country. The policy may look promising from a bird's eye. However, before one jumps to applaud, one requires to be aware of the current challenges that the education system faces at the grassroots level. My previous speakers have already mentioned that this policy has ignored totally the role of private schools and NGO. There is no acknowledgement on the contribution of private schools, which includes many of our unaided Catholic institutions. The policy essentially brings into the fold children of the age group of 3 to 6 years who are not covered in the existing structure, which begins only at grade 1. As per this new policy, the school system will commence from the age of 3. My fear is this, that most parents may not be willing to send their children at such an early stage to school, especially in the rural areas. At several places, the parents may have to accompany them, leaving aside their job, their work. This policy depicts the early childhood care education as being new and radical. Let me say so. To claim such is a misleading, because thousands of Catholic institutions all over India, right from pre-independence, has rendered service to preschools, which has been ignored totally by this policy. This policy proposes to train Anganwadi teachers to meet the standards of early childhood care education through the 6-month diploma courses. This itself would be a Herculean task. Interestingly, Anganwadi workers already are overburdened with numerous public health and nutrition duties. This policy presumes that to attain the universal foundational literacy and numeracy, teachers will take the support of volunteers and ensure one-to-one peer tutoring. It means depending on the goodwill of the people, which cannot be demanded. Thus, no one will be accountable if one fails the target. This policy has repeatedly emphasized on engagement with Indian civilization history, which creates uncertainty of biasness in the new curriculum and misinformation of history, as it is a concern even with the current curriculum. Conveniently, this policy ignores the contribution made by the medieval history. Even the religious tradition of Maharashtra, like Bhakti movement, Warkari Panth, etc., have been downplayed by this policy. The policy has not given sufficient consideration to many already existing problems in the education system, such as issues related to government school teachers. In Maharashtra, this is a fact that less than 7% teachers pass the teachers' eligibility tests, with the Supreme Court also recently made it mandatory. Today, more than 25% children study in private schools. In the history of Indian education, Kothari Commission report of 1964 and 66 is a landmark document. Kothari report stresses that any educational approach has to be based on the universal human values. The National Curriculum Framework of 2005-2 had a great emphasis on universal human values. However, I feel sad to say that in this new education policy, there is no talk about universal human values. The policy is silent on many relevant social sciences like studies on caste, Dalits, gender, environment, peace education, and human rights. It maintains silence on fundamental rights. In my view, the main danger with the policy is that it proposes to inculcate traditional Indian values and constitutional values. However, there is a big contradiction here. Constitutional values are systematically eroded and undermined under the present regime. Which Indian values are they talking about then? The document rightly emphasizes that focus needs to shift from review to learning. All of us will agree to that. But it contradicts itself with the increased number of exams in class 3, 5, 8 and board exam in 10th and 12th, which in reality will continue to be competitive given the limited number of opportunities available. This policy says that from the age of 12, that is from the 6th standard onwards, the child should be taught certain vocations. My fear is that this concept will be implemented in such a way to take away the marginalized and downtrodden section of the society from the mainstream of education, denying them opportunities of higher level of education and make them manual laborers. This may also impede a more holistic learning. The emphasis laid on digital education can lead to further segregation, as our state of Maharashtra currently doesn't have adequate infrastructure to support it. More than 70% children from marginalized backgrounds could be excluded, as evident from the COVID-19 pandemic, where many children are missing online classes due to the digital divide. This policy envisages that curriculum and pedagogy of our institution must develop among the students a deep sense of respect towards the fundamental duties and constitutional values, bonding with one's country, and conscious awareness of one's roles and responsibilities in a changing world. My question is the omission of fundamental rights a deliberate or an oversight? Does this policy want fundamental rights to be erased from the memories of future generations? With multiple exit points and intermixing of vocational and theoretical studies, the policy is trying to project itself as a very progressive system, is actually promoting a system where those who can't afford 15 years of long schooling will be left out to be in the pool of laboring masses. To conclude, accepting this policy without resisting its implementation will not only betray millions of poor, unprivileged, and marginalized students, it will also promote fascism among children. Thus, the onus is on all educational institutions to stop this anti-student policy. We must form united front with each other and collectively chalk out strategy of resistance and must fight the unpleasant agenda of the present regime. Thank you.
Thank you, Father Francis, for your insights. Before I give the mic to our last speaker, it's very important. Just a point of view that I want to share with you is that education currently is in the concurrent list. However, the Indian Constitution in its original enactment defined education as a state subject. Under Article 42 of the Constitution, an amendment was added in 1976, and education became a concurrent list subject, which enables the central government to legislate it in the manner suited to it. So you can imagine the mischief, everything that this right-wing government does, it shows it does in the framework of the law and the Constitution, but does just the opposite. Participants who have questions, remember one thing, that besides this being an educational webinar on the national education policy, we also want to launch a campaign against taking a stand against this with all stakeholders, including from other groups and communities, for a broad-based platform to fight this. And it's important for us that we all close ranks on this. So any questions that you have, you can put it in the chat box, or if you want to raise questions, we have almost 277 participants still in the list who are hearing this particular webinar. So those who want to put their question in the chat box, please do put. If you want to address it to any particular panel member, please do mention that so that we have a query, and then we surely will conclude with some sort of an action plan, both in terms of the city level in Mumbai and the national level on the All India Catholic Union side. Dr. John Dayal, who's also a very dear friend of mine, is basically like a hero to me, because he's one of those people who have put their heads on the chopping block in terms of taking a stand against this right-wing approach, not now, but consistently for over 4 or 5 decades, at great personal risk. He's been a former president of the All India Catholic Union, currently is a spokesperson, but basically connected with the AICU for a pretty long time. But I know for sure that he has had to pay a very, very big price at one point of time, because he's a veteran journalist. He was an editor of one of the leading newspapers in Delhi, but he quit because he didn't want to toe the line that was directed to him. So he is a man who basically has taken a stand. He has fought for us. He's been our biggest voice of conscience world over. So may I present to you Dr. John Dayal.
Thank you very much, Dolphy. Thank you, Bishop, the two fathers, and Mr. Patil. It was wonderful listening to you, because in effect, you echoed my thoughts, possibly even more sharply. But I want to begin from the last gem of information that came, that education was removed from the state list to the concurrent list in 1976. For those of us with gray beards or gray hair would recall that was the height of the Indian emergency. That was also the time when the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act was passed to curtail the limits, the scope, and the reach of NGOs. This government was afraid of what NGOs would want to do, what minorities would want to do, what free thinkers and the liberal and the liberated mind would want to do, want to think. So essentially, the effort of government, let's say the last 35 years, has been to contain the human mind that was liberated in the freedom struggle, that allowed us to think of a life without a colonizing Raj. The mind that was liberated by Gandhi, who, despite his failings, thought everybody was equal. And above all, Nehru, who thought the Indian genius needed sphere and space to flower and reach for the skies, living and based and not growing on mythology, but on science and technology, on philosophy, all doors and all windows open. Consistently over the years, this has been tampered with. And this policy wants to seal it into a coffin and bury it deep. I don't want to talk as a Catholic or even as a Christian or a minority person. So our concerns are extremely well laid out by those who run institutions. I run no institution. But let us think about the average Indian, because we have done no survey. We do not know of the Christian population and the Catholic population, even in Mumbai, even in Goa, even in in Mangalore. How many of our own children study? What percentage studies in a school run by our own institution? How many of our teachers work in one of our own institutions? So the issue is larger. I would say most of our children across the country, not only Christians, Hindus, Sikhs, Muslims, study in schools that are run by the government, and then to a lesser degree, run by other religions, by NGOs, by the corporate sector. Who controls them? What happens? I have been a reporter and a writer, so fancy words don't impress me. Facts do. I go to villages. What is the government school there? What is the dropout rate? What does the Anganwadi do? At what age do children come? Do they come to the school at 3, even in an Anganwadi? If you did not give them a midday meal, would anybody come? What about the poor Anganwadi worker? You want to train her in modern Montessori and advanced educational techniques. A poor girl who for the last 6 months hasn't got her salary, who's at the beck and call of the village chief, the thanedar, the local politician, who's raped and mutilated and beaten up and treated no more than a servant, who, if Dalit, is not allowed to feed the children of the upper caste. You want her. She's quite capable of taking care of her children and mine. But she needs training, she needs nurture. She needs nurture even to be a good Anganwadi worker. That is where it begins. The tat patti. You're talking of 2% infrastructure. You're talking of digitals. They don't even have a tat patti. The girls don't have a toilet. What are we talking of? We come to the next issue. I'm not coming to the politics of it. I'm just coming to who are the people, the parents. With what heart do they send their child? If they wanted to, they could have sent her to the local madrasa if Muslims, or to the local panditji if they wanted to learn Sanskrit. They send the child to emancipate, to lift the child out of the morass in which the parents have grown up. Aspiration, not the aspiration that votes a certain person into power, but the aspiration of every parent that the child should stand on his or her shoulders and reach for what Nehru said, for the stars. What hope does the parent have? Are you not betraying his trust? Are you not betraying his hope? Forcing him to go back, forcing him to curtail the ambition, forcing him, learn your trade, learn being a good electrician, learn being a good dhobi, learn all of those are good traits. When I was a child, I was taught how to cook and how to embroider. Those have not reduced me, but those were not at the cost of my basic aspiration to be a physicist, an aspiration which I failed eventually for other reasons. But the aspiration always was there and strove me to work harder. And that you take away by providing not entry points, but exit points. Any vessel that doesn't allow things to come in, but has holes for things to go out, what will remain? Manu will remain. Only those entitled will remain. Only those with money. And that will then bring us to the teachers. Father Frazer has spelled it so beautifully. They are a part of a culture, pedagogy, textual material, training, the environment. I have managed university colleges as a paradropper. But we know what is the problem. We know when politically influenced persons come in, what mess they make in management committees. And here you're creating a management that is totally in the beck and call of political masters, which in fact is the surrogate of the political master. No pretense. As it is, government schools in all states, I may say, are little less than religious schools. The graffiti, the calendar art, the morning prayers are not Christian prayers, they're not Muslim prayers, they're not Sikh prayers, they're not Buddhist prayers, they're not even Jaini prayers. They are of a religion. You are creating the sort of culture that certain books spoke of. One nation, one language, one culture. That is not possible. Lastly, let me come to a group which has not been spoken of very much, although the member representing the teachers' constituency spoke of it. The teacher as an employee, the teacher as an empowerer, the teacher as himself an ambitious person who would like to get a PhD, would like to educate himself further. He doesn't want to be a coaching center teacher. There are coaching centers, and the fact that so many coaching centers exist is proof that there's something extremely faulty with the government system of training, and more than that, the government system of examination. That the competitiveness that one of the speakers spoke of is a killer competition. It is not a growth competition. The first past the post as in our elections. What about the teachers? In fact, all the constituencies involved, all the stakeholders, it is the teachers across the country who have said, reject the NEP. It is fatal for you as a parent. It is fatal for the future of your child. It is, of course, going to kill us as teachers. And therefore, let me come to the larger thing. I was there in the Supreme Court as a viewer, listener, when a Christian educational institution's future, and thereby Article 30, was being adjudicated. What did the Chief Justice say? Christian institutions, and he cupped his hands like this. Christian institutions are crucibles of nation building. Because there were thoughts, there were freedom, there were people from all varieties of cultures, languages. We were mingling with each other, learning from each other, learning to live together, learning to love the nation, learning to give the God which had made them equal. Not Jesus, God who had made them equal. And they went out whole people, which is why people send their children, politicians, Arun Jaitley, everybody else. That is why Mr. Advani's parents sent him to St. Andrews in Karachi to learn values. Whether he did or not is possibly a failure. But that is what parents wanted 100 years ago, and they want now. Values would be lost. When we were dissecting the first draft of this policy, some of us were called upon to analyze it. We used contemporary tools through which you judge whether people have been doing plagiarism, whether they're copying somebody else's thesis or not. We applied those tools to the policy and to what we knew to be an RSS document, to what we knew to be other documents that we prepared. And let me assure you with full confidence, because we gave the documents to Mr. Sitaram Yechuri in Parliament and Mr. Rahman Khan Rajya Sabha, both of whom stopped the first draft from coming up. What did our research show? Large chunks of the policy were verbatim, cut and paste from documentation that had been prepared in semi-secret conclaves in Madhya Pradesh. This is not a policy. This is, as somebody rightly said, converting schools into the Sunday morning place where the bodhiki is not about education. The bodhiki is to fit you into being a soldier for a certain ideology. Schools are not to produce soldiers. Schools are to produce thinkers and nation builders. What is therefore our action plan? Point one, of course, is challenge the policy with all force at your mind. I'm not advocating that you close down educational institutions. Once a nun in Dehradun said, I will close down my institution if you, Mr. Collector, will be so harsh. And the collector said, close it down today and tomorrow I will open it as a government school. So that's not an answer. Educate parents what they will lose. The teachers are up in arms. Encourage them. You offer an alternate policy, which is good for the country. All these foreign universities want to come in. Show them what are they going to come in for. You can't make an income in India if the product that you're going to get is this that has been turned out, because you will fail to bring them up to par. You will fail to bring them up to the graduate of Yale or Oxford or thing. Collectively, universally, it's a common fight. It's a fight for the human mind. And we must fight to liberate the human mind from those who want to contain it, capture it, imprison it. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dr. John Dayal, for your great thoughts. And now there are some questions that have been put in. We also want to know from the participants, like some of you have said, we have attended many webinars, but what do we do next? I think there is no wisdom from our side. The wisdom is from your side. You are 276 against the 4 speakers we had today. So wisdom must be from your side to start thinking what we must do. But there are 1 or 2 questions we would like somebody to answer. One question is, does the NEP 2020 apply only to government-aided schools? I'll take 2 questions, and then basically somebody could answer for it. And another question that was raised was, what is the next step to protect our Catholic institutions as religious institutions? First of all, let's be very clear that this is just not a target specifically against Christian institutions. It is targeted against education in general, in particular. You must be very clear on that. That's why a battle has to be fought with all groups and communities across religious lines to take a stand against this. So these 2 questions, can somebody would like to answer them? Father Frazer?
Well, I think they do target in particular aided schools by calling them public schools. But there are many provisions which are saying, for example, that one public school and one private school will be twinned. Now, how will they do that if the private school is also not going to be controlled? So they have been a little vague there, but there are points in which they are showing that the whole system of education will be controlled by these government bodies.
It's very simple, really. This is a national education policy. It is not a national education policy for aided schools. Those are subsets. It is to define the whole range, and therefore I chose to talk about government schools. They would be very good if government would give them the funding to get a good lab. If the government would ensure the teachers have a 6-month sabbatical once every 5 years to attend a university and upgrade their skills. To begin with, they should get a blackboard to begin with, a roof, a toilet, drinking water. Those were there. And when they talk of training, when they talk of management, what is the saying? You provide the infrastructure, we tell you how to use it. In Delhi, Archbishop Vincent, the emeritus Archbishop, we saw so many municipal schools going to seed. And he very bravely asked the government, give me those poor schools, I will upgrade them for you. We don't want the building. We will ensure that the children are taught the same pedagogy as we teach other children in the diocesan schools and the congregation. And the government chickened out. Once we made the offer, the government chickened out because they realized that the children would go out of control. The children would be taught liberation, as I said, and that would not do. The teachers would suddenly discover that there's scope, that they can learn, they can graduate, they can leave a municipal salary and try for a higher secondary or try for a private school. And the government wanted control. These are control freaks. Government is a control freak. Therefore, as many fathers have pointed out, they want the prime minister to be in charge of everything. He's in charge of the war with China. He also wants to be in charge of the primary school and the selection of college students and the selection of teachers. What prime ministers are not for that. Prime ministers delegate. That is why it was put in the state subject and the municipal subject list. And therefore, there is the red herring. There is the red flag. And we need to watch that. And that is also, by the way, the areas where we need to protest. The parents must protest at every village, all the way up. And that is a big political task which we must undertake.
Thank you, John Dayal. You know, it's very interesting, like Father Frazer did already share and the other speakers also shared, that we have enough problems with the existing education system because of lack of budgets and other things. And I read a very beautiful thing which Milton Friedman said, the government solutions to a problem is usually as bad as the problem, you know. So, you know, you have the government talking about solution to problems, but creating more problems. And in fact, one of the participants has said, is there something positive about this policy? Celine Martin has raised this question. Is there something positive about this policy? Anybody would like to react to this?
Original policy was 400 plus pages. It was heavy enough to kill not just a fly, but a mouse or a rat also. You could use it for that. But seriously enough, you know, seriously, it is like a curate's egg. You know what is a curate's egg? An egg which is good in parts. A policy has to be taken whole. The government is not allowing us to pick and choose from the policy. It is not take the low-hanging fruit and avoid the bigger fruit. Do not touch the things that hurt you. It is holistic. It is together. It's like the Indian Penal Code, like the Constitution. You can't pick and choose. You either reject it and ask them to rewrite it, or you lump it.
Any Father Frazer, Father Francis would like to react to this because you all have done a study about this policy, intense study.
Whom were you asking, Dolphy? Whom are you asking?
Either you or Father Francis, whether you want to react. Is there something positive about this policy?
I think I would react. There are a number of educationists who are speaking on webinars like this. So, for example, Anita Ramphal, Professor Anita Ramphal, is one of those, you know, really important educationists. She's been on all these commissions, etc. before. She was obviously left out of it. And she was asked that question and she said nothing. So you know what my answer is. In other words, if you really look at the impact of that, if you're saying some small things here and there, are they good? Okay. But the whole impact is going to be, as I used the word earlier, devastating. Devastating. And not just as far as education is concerned, the whole, Mr. Kapil Patil put it very well. He says the whole integral qualities of our country, of the composite culture and secular fabric will be torn apart. I think that's what we have to look at rather than say, are there small things here and there which are good? It doesn't matter. The impact, as Dr. John Dayal said, will be terrible. And this is the time in which the states are formulating their implementation plans. So all those who are involved in the states in their implementation plans, I think those you need to put pressure on. That's why I mentioned there are 2 committees in Maharashtra, for example.
Okay.
Meeting each and every member of those committees and pointing out that this will not do, this is a problem for us or for the country. I don't think we have really started that. So the task is really a very large task and so many different areas we have to work at.
It was very nice of you to invite Mr. Kapil Patil, who is very much of a secular group and quite his presence is felt in all the media. I think if 300 people who attend this webinar start interacting with their own organization, not limiting themselves to only the church organization. We need to go beyond the church organization and make our presence felt. And whichever contact that we have with the political party, whether it's a ruling party or other party, need to take their support to carry our views further.
Can I request any last words anybody wants to say before I ask Advocate Raphael? Elias, you want to say something? Yeah, Elias, Vice President of the AICU, please speak.
Yeah, and just adding to what Dolphy has been saying all this while, when we planned this webinar, he said, what do we do up to what steps? So that's why we said we'll have a webinar in stages. The first one would be more of an awareness so that people understand that there's an issue. People understand that there are problems with the policy. Next, we would get people who would like to be an active part into a movement of what we can do. I think that's why Lancy has been insisting, Dolphy has been insisting that we collect the emails and phone numbers of people who would like to be an active part in this, who would contribute in the intellect, who would contribute in communication. And as people have said, we should get it in regional languages. We would require people to convert the document and the destructive thing that we can do into more simpler words. Then we would require people to convert it into regional languages so we can distribute the information to many others. So I think we've had a good start, and I think we should push it till we get results in it. AICU on its part will continue doing whatever we can to network the various people together, and we are open to ideas. That's why most of us have been keeping quiet into understanding what is the field and how we can join the dots together. Thank you.
Yeah, can I now request, we are nearing 2 minutes to 8. We would like to conclude. You have been very, very patient. Can I request President of the Bombay Catholic Sabha, Advocate Rafael D'Souza, to propose a vote of thanks?
Respected Archbishop of Calcutta, Thomas D'Souza, Reverend Father Frazer, Mascarenhas, Reverend Father Francis Swamy, Sri John Dayal, Past President, AICU and Spokesperson, the National President of All India Catholic Union, Lancy Dicuna, the moderator for today's event, Dolphy, and last but not the least, very important person, Mr. Kapil Patil, and all of you, my dear friends who have participated in this webinar. This webinar was conceptualized basically to get the lay people involved, lay people of all communities, because the invitation for this webinar had been posted in different groups, irrespective of caste, creeds, denominations, or religion. It is, I'm very thankful to all the 289 participants or 292 participants who were present. Someone was asking that we need to decimate, and Mr. John Dayal had said coalition groups or movement to be started. If 289 people, all of us talk to 10 people, we would have had the multiplying effect. And as somebody has said, when it comes to the local church level, local mohallas, local societies, talking about it, it would have greater impact. The one thing which has come out very clearly and categorically is this national education policy is trying to destroy the composite culture and at the same time trying to impose on us an ideological thought, which in a country which is democratic, secular, socialistic, and which guarantees certain rights to the minorities, to the scheduled caste, and to all of us as citizens. I'm not referring Article 30 or Article this or that, but what it guarantees is that we are all equal citizens. PPP is not going to be the answer to the education of our country. Philanthropic, private or public participation will only make education centered towards the rich and the affluent, and which will destroy totally the marginalized. We need to take a stand, and I'm very glad many of you have put in your contact numbers on the chat box. The Bombay Catholic Sabha at the local level here and the All India Catholic Union at the national level will work as the center points for generating the thoughts and an action plan with the collaboration of all intellectual individuals, whether they are private social, institution running people, clergy oriented, or any other NGO oriented. We will all join you together in opposing what is not right for the society, and what is good for the society we will definitely support. Father Frazer made a very good point, and somebody was asking, what is good in this policy? Only good thing in this policy is the flowery language. Rest all, everybody has understood. Today, at least these 292 people. The thought booklet, which will come out of the presentation made by our eminent speakers, will definitely help us to take it to the grassroots level, as Flavia has said. Let me thank all of you, Archbishop Thomas D'Souza, Reverend Father Frazer Mascarenhas. You are always available to us, and we can always count on you. Mr. Kapil Patil, a very big thank you to you, because you are a legislator and you can take our thoughts forward. Father Francis Swamy, I'm very happy that Archdiocesan Education Board has got involved with the RETI, and we will carry it for together. And Dr. John Dayal, I don't have to thank you, you are a part of us. You have been always forthright, hard-hitting, but at the same time very concerned about what is good for the society. I would like to make a special mention about Bishop Gerard Matthias of Lucknow. He is not a speaker, he is not a person who has been seen, but he is one of the bishops who has been here with us right up to a few minutes back from the beginning. Thank you, Gerard. Thank you, Bishop Gerard, for your kind presence. And all of you, my dear friends, who made it possible to be with us for this webinar. Thank you, and God bless all of us. Thank you.